Would like to invite you to the mic.
Thank you, Maria, for this very kind introduction. And thank you all for joining me in this session. We are living through challenging times. In particular, the past week has been challenging week for many people in the United States with Hurricane Ida, which originally was going to come. We thought it was coming from Houston, but it kind of swung east and hit Louisiana and then went all the way to the south, to the northeast, and caused major flooding in the northeast. And again, several dozens of people died just from the flooding. Once we live through kind of big events like that, and especially COVID, I think is what I would call an epochal event. It is useful to step back and say, okay, what can we learn from these kind of events? And I think there are many things we can learn, but I want to focus on one aspect that to me was I got kind of a flash of insight, and this is the dichotomy between efficiency and resilience. So I want to remind you that just a couple of years ago, we had a catastrophic failures in 2 Boeing 737 MAX. In each case, it was the maneuver that was called the MCAS, Maneuvering Characteristic Augmentation System. And there were 2 fatal accidents. Hundreds of people were killed. And, for Boeing, there was economic damage and reputational damage. It was a very serious failure for Boeing. And then in February of last year, we had what was called Winter Storm Uri, which was the costliest US natural disaster, cost almost $200 billion, at least 164 fatalities, probably more. We had in Houston, you can see that Houston got snowfall. And to get such level of snowfall in Houston, it's incredibly rare. And we had a week without power, without water. I mean, really, it was a catastrophic failure and without power and water, civilization basically stops. We barely survived. And of course, we are still living through now the someplace here in the United States is the 4th wave of COVID-19, which is first and foremost a public health crisis. By now, we have all over the world, millions of people have died from the pandemic, and we keep looking at the dashboard and is the wave going up? Is the wave going down? But of course, this pandemic of such magnitude caused tremendous economic damage. In about a year ago in November, just around Thanksgiving, big holiday in the United States, we had 26 million people who just did not have enough food. What you see here is not a parking lot at Disneyland. It's the people sitting in their cars for a food bank, waiting to get them to take some food and go home and take home because they just don't have enough food at home. People lost their jobs, didn't have enough money. They still on the car, but they had to go and get food. And you may remember that throughout 2020, we had a social crisis in the United States with the Black Lives Movement and with black men in particular getting shot by police on a hair trigger, killed by police. In this case, was suffocated by police with George Floyd, and protests become violent protests all over the country. And we had a political crisis, which we barely survived. We had a violent takeover of the U.S. Capitol, of Congress. It was really democracy was hanging by a thread. And so one big question to ask is, why are we not ready for a pandemic? Easy answer to say, well, this was a black swan. It was always, we can be ready for every unforeseen event. Stuff happens. Here is a book, The Viral Storm, The Dawn of a New Pandemic Age by Nathan Wolfe. And you think, oh, this book must have just come out just now, just after the pandemic. But this is a book from 2011. People have been warning us about a coming pandemic. And you can think, okay, there are lots of books about every possibility. Why should we take seriously every book? Well, it turns out that people did take it seriously. In 2006, the Secretary of Health and Human Services of the US, of the federal government, Michael O'Leary, testified in front of the Senate how to prepare for the pandemic flu. This is in 2006, May 25, 2006. So people knew that the pandemic was coming, and still we were not ready. Why? Now, let me remind you, this is it was a theme that was kind of popular in March 20. And people in March 20, the wave was the first wave was going up and up and up. And people talk about the need to flatten the curve. At that point, vaccines looked very, very far away. All we could do is like masking and lockdowns and social distancing. And people were arguing that we must do it. And why do we have to flatten the curve? It will not really change the course of the pandemic in some sense in terms of number of cases. At that point, we thought about hundreds of thousands of infection, not about tens of millions as we have now. But we wanted to slow it down so we can cope with it. And I need to remind you what would the world look like, at least here in the United States in April, about a year and a half ago. And here is a headline from a newspaper. Nurses are wearing garbage bag as they battle coronavirus. It's like something out of the Twilight Zone, because we did not, what you're seeing now is nurses wearing what's called PPE, personal protective equipment. We didn't have enough of it. So nurses had to wear garbage bags to protect themselves. And the view of that, how we were really so unready to the level of not having enough equipment in the hospitals, inspired an economist, William Galston, to write a column in March 2020 in the Wall Street Journal. And the headline, the title was, "Efficiency is not the only economic virtue." And he wrote, what if the relentless pursuit of efficiency, which has dominated American business thinking for decades, has made the global economic system more vulnerable to shocks? Now, he explained that efficiency comes through the optimal adaptation to an existing environment, while resilience requires the capacity to adapt to disruptive changes in the environment. And resilience is able to recover readily from illness, depression, adversity, or the like. So we see there is a trade-off between efficiency and resilience. And a couple of months later, Tom Friedman, a well-known columnist in the New York Times, wrote, "How We Broke the World. Greed and globalization set us up for disaster." And he wrote, over the past 20 years, we've been steadily removing man-made and natural buffers, redundancy, regulation, and norms that provide resilience and protection when big system, be they ecological, geopolitical, or financial, get stressed. We've been recklessly removing this buffer out of obsession with short-term efficiency. So again, efficiency versus resilience. And a good example for this is something that I remember became a buzzword in the 1980s. It was called just-in-time manufacturing. And the observation was that when you have a warehouse of parts, it's actually very inefficient. Why? You need to build a warehouse. You need to put the parts in the warehouse. Then they sit there just doing nothing. So it's wasted money until they are required to be used. And then you have to take them out, also expensive. So the idea is, let's reduce inventories, because large inventory is very inefficient. And in fact, maybe we don't need inventory. The parts will arrive at the manufacturing line just in time. If we design the logistic very well, the parts will arrive just when they are needed, directly in the factory. And we will not need to have a warehouse of parts at all. So indeed, and for example, Dell computers became famous, not so much for being technically innovative, but for being very, very efficient. Okay, you order a PC, they would not start building your PC until you order it so you could customize it. Very efficient. But of course, it assumes best case logistics. For example, what happens if a ship gets stuck? Nobody thought it could happen, but it could happen. A ship gets stuck in the Suez Canal, and suddenly all these other ships cannot go through. And suddenly your manufacturing line has to stop because it is not ready for, there's no spare parts. So it is efficient at the expense of resilience. in fact, one of the things that we have seen in 2020 was not just a pandemic, but we couldn't get toilet paper. I mean, you see here a picture of, this is Costco. It's a big kind of warehouse type of store, and this is the paper section, paper product section, and you see it's almost practically empty. And the Wall Street Journal in August of a year ago had a sequence of articles about the pandemic and the economic aspect of the pandemic. And they say, why are there still not enough paper towels? I don't think the Wall Street Journal wanted to have a big headline with toilet paper, so they talk about paper towels, even though the lack of toilet paper was much more dramatic, of course. And they say, blame lean manufacturing. Lean manufacturing is just another name for just-in-time manufacturing. A decades-long effort to eke out more profit by keeping inventory low left many manufacturers unprepared when COVID-19 struck, and production is unlikely to ramp up significantly anytime soon. So we were efficient at the expense of resilience. And the same thing, you don't need to go to factories. Hospitals were overwhelmed. Why were hospitals overwhelmed? And again, the Wall Street Journal says, a year's long drive for efficiency. Health systems have kept a tight rein on employee numbers and expanded outpatient care, helping their finances, but making them less prepared for medical crisis. Again, being prepared for medical crisis, having extra capacity is inefficient because most of the time, this extra capacity doesn't do anything. And when you look at the impact in terms of cases of COVID and death, there was the nursing home in the United States. People call it a national catastrophe. A whole generation of elders have passed away prematurely. And again, Business Week said the industry could have done more to stop the virus. The Wall Street Journal says at that time was 1/3 of the deaths were in long-term care facilities. And when you look partly why was it? Well, they were too short on staff. They were not prepared for anything like that. There was just nobody, they were prepared for the best case, not for the worst case. Then this is the COVID. Now, what we saw in Texas was that there was suddenly a temperature that were lower than usual and snow, and the power system was not ready for this. And even though there have been warning that we could have such patterns of cold weather, partly because you have to understand geography of the United States. We have mountains on the east and mountains in the west and huge flat plains in the middle. And that means that sometimes cold air can come from the Arctic and roll down all the way to the Gulf of Mexico. So temperature can drop here very quickly. Again, this was unusual freeze, but now there are going to be major lawsuits because you saw the damage was in the hundreds of billions of dollars. And the lawsuit claim, we'll see whether it will succeed, is that they were not prepared despite multiple warnings. So see, in each case, we had catastrophic failures, and the cause was the quest for efficiency. And you don't have to just look at catastrophic failures now. This is actually old news. You go back to the financial crisis of 2008, and you may remember of Wall Street firms having, like Lehman Brothers, have to declare bankruptcy, overnight. And it's pretty amazing because Wall Street was the part of the industry that, what is Wall Street about? It's all about risk arbitrage. They are all about risk management. This is what the financial industry is about. It's about risk management. And they were not ready. So what happened? People try to analyze why was Wall Street not ready for the crisis. And they looked at their financial risk models. And they had risk models. This is a formula called value at risk. I won't go into the detail of the formula. This is called value at risk. And basically, I want to know with probability 99%, I will not lose more than, let's say, $100 billion. And I believe I can withstand $100 billion. Okay, so that sounds pretty good. But what happened in the 1% case? The tail event. So the formulas were good for normal situation. But in abnormal situation, they really had nothing to go by. And that's why they ended up failing. So Again, if you don't think about what could happen, you're not going to be ready. And in fact, with this tension between efficient and resilience, you look at American society and you ask why did we see 26 million people without food? And the answer is that this was well known before, that American society is very precarious. That this all goes back to 2016. There were some studies. 47% of Americans would have trouble finding $400 to pay for an emergency. $400. If you raise it to $1,000, what is $400? This is like a brake job. If you, the brakes on your car fail, it's $400 to fix it. 47% of Americans cannot do that. You have to understand, America, if you don't have a car in most places, can get you your job. And if you raise it to $1,000, then now it's about 2/3 of Americans cannot cope with it. So suddenly you don't have a car because your transmission went bad. And if you don't have a car, you may lose your job. If you lose your job, you may not be able to make payments on your house and you lose your house. Very precarious society. In an article from June 2020, the Atlantic Monthly, Adam Serwer wrote, it didn't have to be like that. The desperation of US workers in the aftermath of the coronavirus was a product of a series of policy decisions and missed opportunities. We had a society geared for efficiency, but not for resilience. And let's kind of change it to a different direction. And this is an article from the Communication of the ACM, big headline, Sex as an Algorithm. Some people got offended. I was the editor-in-chief. Some people got offended by the pink color. But this was about nature. And the subtitle was Theory of Evolution under the Lens of Computation. So we're trying to look at why did nature select sexual reproduction? An article in the Communication of the ACM, Adi Livnat and Kirstel Papadimitriou asked the following question. When we look at two algorithms that are inspired by nature, there's a whole area of research called natural computing. One algorithm simulated annealing, which is essentially local search via mutation with occasional jump. This is the occasional unoptimizing event. Genetic algorithm has mutation, but also crossbreeding, and it mimics sexual reproduction and natural selection. Computational experience is that simulated annealing that doesn't have sex, only mutations, is a much better algorithm. So why has nature chosen sexual reproduction as almost the exclusive reproduction of mechanism in animals? There are very, very few exceptions, but by and large, animals use sex, even though it's less efficient. And the answer that they offer, it's not only about efficiency, which is running time and approximation ratio. What they show is that sexual reproduction yields greater genetic diversity. And greater genetic diversity translates to resilience. When the environment suddenly changes, species that have greater diversity will survive. Some individual organism will not, but the species will survive because they have genetic diversity. There is some background noise. It will go away in a few minutes. I hope you can still hear me. The answer is that both efficiency and resilience are optimizations. But efficiency is short-term optimization, and resilience is long-term optimization. Nature seems to prefer long-term optimization. Why? Well, survival. You know, if there was no questions of survival, then we will optimize in the short term. I mean, the dinosaurs were very efficient. You know, this is the Tyrannosaurus Rex. Very efficient predators. Did not survive. As Darwin said, it is not the strongest of the species that survive, not the most intelligent. It is the one that is most adaptable to change. And in fact, we all see around us sometimes people who are very, very smart, but are not very adaptable. So again, nature tells us resilience, resilience, resilience. Now let's go back and look at computing. Wikipedia says, in computer science, the analysis of algorithm is the process of finding the computational complexity of algorithms. So our focus is on efficiency. Go back and look at the Bible of Algorithm, The Art of Computer Programming, authored by Donald Knuth. Several volumes. What are they all focused about? About efficiency. Knuth did not think at all about resilience, only about efficiency, efficiency, efficiency. So let's take one example. Let's look at a very classical example from algorithm. We look at sorting. So bubble sort is quadratic in the worst case and the average case. Merge sort is even in the worst case, n log n. Quick sort, quadratic in the worst case, but n log n in the average case. In 2013, David Acklin, in article in Communication of the ACM, asked, okay, clearly merge sort is the most efficient, but what about robustness or resilience? So he said, suppose that some of the comparisons can give us erroneous result. So he did simulation to see what will happen if you have to sort, let's say, 1,000 elements, but each comparison has 10% probability of being wrong. And then you can look at the end and see how well sorted is your list. Turns out that bubble sort is very robust. It will still do very, very good sorting, but merge sort and quick sort are not. What is the answer? What is the magic here? The magic here that bubble sort does redundant comparisons. So it will give us good result even though it is less efficient. So again, we see that there is a tension here in computer science. We have never paid much attention. We always go by running time and memory and space, and we focus on efficiency and less so on resilience. Very famous algorithm, one of the most famous algorithm, even many non-computer scientists heard about it, PageRank. So PageRank gave rise to Google. You may remember what it was like in the mid-90s when the web just started, and we had some web search algorithms like Alta Vista was a search engine, but Google came up with a new algorithm called PageRank, which was trying to identify the important pages. We got PageRank became a very good algorithm that gave rise to the growth of Google. So PageRank basically worked by analysis of the links. If you have many links point to you, then you must be important. If you have many important websites point to you, you must be very important, and so on and so forth. But very quickly, people discover that they can game out a PageRank, and this became known as search engine optimization. And if you want to raise your website up, you simply have to create lots of fake websites, and they should point to you and point to them. So people very quickly realize that you can game out PageRank. So it is not used today anymore by Google. The patent has expired. You're welcome, all welcome to try to use it. And what does Google do today? They don't tell us, because as soon as they will tell us, we will try to game it out. So today, this is a big trade secret. Google does not tell us what the algorithm is. Still, people try to game it, but so it's a game. It goes on between Google or the other search engines and the optimizer. I want to give you an example from a very classical results in computing. So you may have heard of Valiant has popularized in the mid-80s PAC learning. PAC was probably approximately correct in a 1986 paper. But the concept of PAC more generally applied when you have a randomized algorithm to compute a function approximately. And the goal was that with high confidence, the error will be low. And you're given two parameters of the allowed error and the confidence delta. And what you want to say is with probability, at least delta, the error will be smaller than epsilon. And I won't get into the details. But the definition ignores the question, what happened at tail event? Remember what happened with value at risk. They ignore the tail events. The definition of Stockmar ignore what happened at the tail event of 1 minus delta. Maybe the error there is huge. So in 2006, my collaborator, Pratik Chakraborty and Kuldeep Mill, we think we corrected, we met what was probably would have been Stockmar's intuition, and we defined strong PAC. We said the result also should be correct in expectation. And this will give you resilience, because you don't have to worry of a catastrophic error in the tail event. I want to, typically when you think about efficiency, you think about like time and space and maybe bandwidth. But I want to show you that our obsession with efficiency is broader than that. In 2013, I wrote in a column in Communication of the CM, our discipline is dedicated to reducing friction. Latency must be eliminated. Bandwidth must increase, and ubiquity should be universal. Our goal is to reduce the friction of computing and communication as much as possible. We think if I tell someone friction, they think it's a bad thing, friction. In fact, Mark Zuckerberg described frictionless sharing as the goal of Facebook. It should be very easy to share. Well, now we know what happens when you make it too easy to share. You get all kind of adverse impact. Today, people are talking about social media as destroying democracy, partly because it is just too damn easy to share. And what do people share? People share also fake news and extreme content. And social media is now the genie is out of the bottle and nobody knows how to put the genie back in the bottle. And partly it comes because we said it should be frictionless. And reducing friction comes at the expense of resilience in many other ways. For example, in 2010, in May 2010, there was something known as the flash crash. The US stock market suddenly dropped 600 points in 5 minutes, which was unprecedented, such a large drop. They had to stop trading because of this drop. And it turns out that the source of this, the cause of the crash was what's called high frequency trading or algorithmic trading. So most trading decisions today are made not by humans, but by algorithms. And people realize that in addition to making good decision, it's even more important to make fast decision. If you see an opportunity, you want to make the trade as soon as possible. People went from, when it was human trading, it was about seconds. Now it's about microseconds. And the argument in favor of this is make the market more liquid. But even some of the people that started this industry said today's drive for speed has absolutely no social value. And economists that have studied this, the fact that I make it microseconds, you try to make it to shave a few fractions of microsecond. They said the high frequency trading arms race is a symptom of flawed market design. They said this is really does not contribute overall to the market. So again, it's efficiency at the expense of resilience. And you see it even outside the domain of computing. For example, there is an app that I have never used, but I read about it. It's called Tinder, where you see pictures on your phone and you swipe to the right if you like. You go to the left if you don't write it. You push to the left. And if two people near each other, they like each other, they like the picture, then the phone tell them they can find each other. And in 2018, Jenna Birch wrote, "Why is it so hard to turn a Tinder date into a relationship?" And she wrote, "In spite of the swarms of matches over the years, I have never had an update turn into an actual relationships." And studies show that people that meet online are very high likelihood of splitting within a year. So Tinder is very efficient, makes it very easy to meet people. But there is a classical American country song. It's called "Easy Come, Easy Goes." And if both sides know that it was easy, it's no big deal if it doesn't work out. This is a line from the song. No hard feelings are no regrets. So if you're less invested, you don't make an effort. So relationships do not last. So easy and frictionless is not necessarily a good thing. At Rice, we have an engineering quad, and we are on one side, and across from us on the other side of the quadrangle is the Department of Mechanical Engineering. And imagine that I go there and I tell them, in computing, we want to reduce all frictions. You guys should do the same. And they say, you're out of your mind. Friction is not bad, good or bad. It depends on the context. When in the drive shaft, I want little friction. But when the tires are on the road, I want high friction. So you have to know where to put the right amount of friction in the right time in the right place. And we don't have this notion when friction is useful. It's all about reducing friction, which I think has been bad for society. And going back to David Ackley, he called it CEO software. What is CEO? Correctness and efficiency only. He said, today when we build software, we focus on it should be correct, it should be efficient, and that's all. And he said, esteem of efficiency should be tempered with respect for robustness. He wrote, it would have been better to have better visibility into the efficiency he called it robustness, trade-off. Existing software quality metrics should be expanded to include correctness degradation under various fault model. You have to start thinking about what can go wrong. And the ultimate example where people did not think what can go wrong was with the Boeing 737 MAX, which basically they tried to save money. So they decided to build a new engine, which is more fuel efficient, more powerful, more fuel efficient, but put it on an old frame of the 737. That's why it's called 737 MAX. Old airframe, new engine. It turned out that that introduced some instability. They said, no problem, the automatic pilot will correct for the instabilities. And it turns out that, again, they have a very efficient design. It depended on one sensor. When that sensor failed, automatic pilot failed. The pilot had to try to stabilize by themselves. They couldn't do it. Two planes crashed. So the engineer over-optimized for fuel efficiency and time to market at the expense of safety. The New York Times, David Gelles wrote November a year ago, the Boeing 737 MAX is a saga of capitalism gone awry because there was so much focus on efficiency, it led to disastrous results. And one of the big issues is security. Computer security is something that we just have neglected. This is a letter, an email that I received from a colleague of mine. And he talked about security, computer security. He says, first somebody builds a thing and it's super useful. Then eventually somebody else comes along and finds a vulnerability. And so not enough, we don't think when we build system, we don't think enough about security from the get-go. There was a survey among 1,200 free and open software, open source software contributors, and for all of them, security was at the bottom of the list. They start with functionality. Functionality first, security last. And think of the Hippocratic oath. First, do no harm. We don't think of first, do no harm. We think first, let's have functions and features because that's what makes software popular. Security comes last. And so we are today. You know, the computer age is now about 75 years, and in fact, it will be 1946. We just celebrated 75 years of the computer age. We had 4 ACM Turing Awards in cryptography, but 9 in cybersecurity. And when you ask people about it, they says, well, what has been done in cybersecurity other than cryptography? But that's our failure as computing professional to develop, to put the right emphasis on cybersecurity. And today we know this is not just about somebody stealing your credit card. We had an attack earlier this year on a pipeline, major pipeline. And today it became very clear that if there is going to be a major war in the future, then a huge part of it will be a cyber war. And try to attack power system, try to attack water system. And we go from day on and day out, and you look at the security community. Even the security community does not say, oh my goodness, we're in the middle of a crisis. They just go on, they publish more papers, but somehow nobody realized that this is a disaster waiting to happen. And partly we are here because the computing community very broadly has been what I would call pro-cyber libertarian. If you compare computing to automobile technology. So as soon as the Ford Model T, all of the manufacturing line in 1908, I think it was, charted the automobile age, we realized people get killed in car crashes. But we started doing all kinds of things to increase safety on the road. For example, we have National Transportation Safety Board. We don't have a national cybersecurity board. Every major accident is going to be investigated, and we are going to make changes because of that. And there are standards of safety for cars. There are no standard for cybersecurity. And whenever people try to introduce a regulation, the tech industry, the tech community immediately jumps. No, don't regulate us. Regulation stifles innovation. But innovation is just means to an end, and the end should be societal progress. And the tech community has not been able to address cybersecurity on its own without regulation. I just don't see how it will be fixed without government regulation. How to regulate is a whole other story that I won't get into here. But I want to talk about the last part of the talk, go back to economic efficiency. So what is economic efficiency? So it's very clear now if I go back and I said, why were we not ready was because there were many warnings, but to get ready would have cost money, and people don't want to spend the money on something that might happen. In fact, it is amazing to learn that in 2018, 19, the Trump administration shut down the CDC's Vaccine Safety Office, 2019. And Trump defended it. He said, oh, we can hire more doctors when we need them. But the answer is, by the time you need more doctors, it is too late to run and hire more doctors. So if it's expensive to prepare for a crisis, it's even more expensive not to be ready in a crisis. So what is economic efficiency? So I go back to something called Investopedia, which is Wikipedia about finance and investment. And here's the definition. Economic efficiency means that goods and factors of production are distributed or allocated to their most valuable uses and waste is minimized. In fact, you find on Investopedia that free market advocates that through self-interest and freedom of production as well as consumption, economic efficiency is achieved and the best interests of society as a whole are fulfilled. Danny Roderick, a prominent economist, wrote about this. Economists tend to be enamored of the power of the markets to promote overall economic prosperity. They believe the markets will do it best. And I want to look at it, and the question is, does efficiency guarantee optimality? Because that's what they seem to be promising us. Free market, unregulated, will be efficient and optimal. So you go and you say, okay, what do they mean by efficiency? So you go and there is something called the first welfare theorem, FWT, first welfare theorem. And they will tell you that if the market is free, then it will converge toward a competitive Pareto optimal equilibrium. And that's what they call efficient. So free markets, they will tell you, produce economic efficiency because the market will converge to a competitive Pareto optimal equilibrium. And that's efficiency, means nobody can do better by local change. The question is, does this guarantee that the best interests of society are served? Because that was the promise. I mean, free markets will give us efficiency and optimality. Papadimitriou again, I mean, part of his project of the last 20 years was called to put a computing lens on other outside of computer science. We saw he looked at biology. This is looking at economics. And together with Koutsopias, he looked at to say how good are equilibria. They said, let's look at the best equilibria versus the worst equilibria. And this ratio between the worst and the best, they call it the price of anarchy. And what they show is the price of anarchy can be arbitrarily high depending on the complexity of the system. So economic efficiency does not guarantee that the best interests of society as a whole are fulfilled. So we have an equilibrium, but the approximation ratio here is pretty bad. The price of anarchy is quite high. And in another paper, Papadimitriou again, together with Daskalakis and Goldberg, ask, how long does it take to reach an equilibrium? How does it, every agent makes some local decision. I decide to raise the price, somebody decides to buy more, somebody decides to produce more. How well how easy it is to reach an equilibrium? And what they showed in the paper was that convergence towards a mixed Nash equilibria can take exceedingly long time. Why? Because essentially it's a local search. You do one local step at a time. and it takes essentially exponentially long. And that tells us at the end that markets will never reach an equilibrium because it takes for a very, very long time and things will change during the time. So going back to the economy, there has been too much focus on equilibrium. So we don't reach equilibrium, we don't reach optimality. It means we have no efficiency and no optimality. You know, I mean, this belief in a free market, you go back to 1987, a famous movie called Wall Street, and Michael Douglas was playing a Wall Street figure, Gordon Gekko, who gave this fiery speech that says, greed, for the lack of better word, is good. Greed is good. This became a thing. Greed is good. Why? Because of Adam Smith's invisible hand. We have background from computer science, and we know that greedy algorithms are not optimal. They're not optimal, and we are now stuck, for example, and we are in a local optimal cybersecurity. It's efficient, but it's not resilient. It's a market failure with so much focus on efficiency that we are not looking at the best interest of society as a whole. In fact, part of this focus on efficiency comes back from a famous paper in around 1970 by an economist, Friedman, who argued that the goal of corporation just to make profit, just focus on profit. And September a year ago, Mark Benioff, CEO of Salesforce, a big cloud computing company, wrote then, I did not agree with Friedman then, and the decade since have only exposed his myopia. Just look where the obsession with maximized profits for shareholders brought us. Terrible economic, racial, and health inequality, and the catastrophe of climate change. It is no wonder that so many young people today believe that capitalism cannot deliver the equal, inclusive, sustainable figure they want. So there was so much economic focus on efficiency, we neglected to think about other aspects of resilience. And one of the things that happened, Nick Hanauer, who is a billionaire but is concerned about inequality, wrote an article again about fairly recently, how between 1975 and 2018 we have seen massive transfer of income from poor people to richer people. So in 1975, in this case, the bottom 90% has the top 1% is 9% of the income. By 2018, at 22% of the income. So this is money flows from the bottom to the top. You know, indeed, if you go look a little bit in economic, you see before 1970, there was less such obsession with efficiency, with profits. So traditional economics, the assumption was that all the engines are optimizing for themselves. And then Kahneman and Tversky and their colleague in behavioral economics showed that people are irrational. But way before that, in 1956, Herb Simon argued, he introduced the concept of satisficing, settling for a good enough outcome. And most of us do that. We are not trying to get the highest possible salary. We need good enough salary, for example. Less efficient, more resilient. So let's go back to COVID-19. What did work? Well, the internet did work. And I'm able to sit here at home and give a talk to you over WebEx. This is just 2 years ago, this scenario of all of us, my sitting at home, giving talk in a conference in Poland from home. This is a radical change. How did the internet prove to be so resilient? Well, the answer is the internet was built for resilience. I'll come back in a minute why. But the major principle is redundancy. And this redundancy is an important principle of resilience, goes back to the 1940s. Error correcting code was all about redundant bits to give us resilience. For Neumann, look at a reliable organism. How does nature build a reliable organism for unreliable cells? And the answer is redundancy. And in fact, today we apply redundancy in other areas, like banks have to have redundant capital. And if you ask where did this redundancy come from, I won't go into detail, but we built a resilient network to prepare for a major nuclear war. And it just, to me, very ironic that in the 1960s, by preparing for a possibility of a nuclear war, the US had to design a very robust communication system. And the answer for that was we need redundancy, we need distributivity, and that's why we have the internet. So in summary, there is a property which I try to argue, which is fundamental but underappreciated societal need. Calling for, I say we need to focus more on resilience, and we need to take into account that people are not very good at preparing for very low probability event or low long-term event. I buy car insurance, but I don't have a choice. I just had to renew the research on my car, and I had to buy car insurance. So society is forcing me to buy car insurance for resilience. And I'll just close by saying, what if, here is a headline just appeared in the newspaper. What if the coronavirus is just a trial run for the bigger crisis of the climate crisis? And in fact, we had unprecedented heat this past summer with hundreds of people dying from heat in the northwest, which is usually a very, very cool area, very pleasant area, even in the summer. They had historically high heat wave. And in fact, when you look at reports from Oregon, for example, again, usually very mild climate, they said that for them, the heat wave was worse than the pandemic. The hospital had a hard time coping with the number of people who had heat strokes. And for them, it was a worse crisis than COVID-19. So we need to think a little bit, the pandemic will be over one day. And the question is, what will the world be like? And everybody understands that we need to think about the world after the pandemic. Farid Zakaria, the pandemic upended the present, but it's giving us a chance to remake the future. Matt Simon, the COVID-19 pandemic has brought incalculable suffering and trauma, but also offers ways for people and societies to change for the better. And we need to think about how will the after COVID world be different than the before COVID world. And we have not done a good job in preparing for catastrophe. An article after the tower in Florida, the condo tower that collapsed, article in Wired magazine, from the fallen Champlain Tower to climate change, humans have not yet learned to avoid catastrophes they know are coming. And the reason for this, I think this slide would summarize it very neatly. This is a politician asking people who wants change. Everybody raised their arm. Who wants to change? Everybody is looking down. Everybody wants change. Nobody wants to change. This is us. This is not, don't think about, this is all of us. We all want change, but we don't want to change. So it's going to be difficult. Thank you very much.
It was very interesting presentation. No, it's not appropriate words. It's unexpected. And the huge amount ideas to think, to process it in our head. Just to remind for participants, I know that you cannot turn on your mic, but you can ask through the chat, or you can raise your hand. This is a special sign near your name, raise hand, and I will turn on, or my colleague of mine, Martin and Dominic, will turn on your mic. So this is a question to listener, to auditorium. Questions.
Yes, there is definitely a lot to digest, and the number of examples that were given are somewhat frightening, because after spending 14 years in US, I have certain doubts that a lot of people will be willing to listen to arguments, especially nowadays, and digest material and realize that preparing and the price we are to pay for preparing for resilience is important. And I see here an enormous role for both the ACM and the IEEE as not only societies of scientists and engineers, but also as societies that have a role to educate people. And I think that this is extremely important, that the last leftover standing authorities that can speak up do this, because without it, I'm thinking about my students who they care about salary and they care about efficiency and they care about writing code, not about reflection. And this is just, I know this, there is not a question here. It's more of a comment and support for what I'm going to be digesting and discussing for the next couple of weeks, probably.
Well, I think there is a fundamental flaw in our higher education system. And definitely this is true, I would say, for what I would call elite private universities in the United States. And when you ask them, what is the mission of the university? They'll say, well, is to teach and do research. Okay, but what is the goal? This is what you're going. That's what you're doing. But what is the goal? And then people start stammering. Well, we like to do research. But what is the goal of the university? And you have to dig and say, well, why do we do this? And now you have public universities are clearly funded by governments, but even private universities are really, we are funded by the public. I mean, it's just in indirect way. For example, we get people to donate us, and the donation is tax free for the people who give us money. So I'm not talking about for-profit universities. That's a whole different beast. They are just businesses. They should not even call them universities. But at the end of the day, I would say the mission of the university is you should think of university as in investments in the public good. You hear the term public good, common good, social good. There are nuances that I don't have to go into. And I don't think we've accepted that we are all really civil servants. We are here in the service of society, and we should ask, okay, what does it imply for us? And we are so focused on my next paper and the next course and the next grade, and I want to have a good job, that we're looking the big picture. Universities are funded by society as engine of societal progress, and that should impose some obligation on us. But this is a conversation that I think needs to get started.
Okay, so also like Martin, I rather have a comment, but it's too many comments, and I see
there are two hands. You have Dominic and you have Ridevan.
Sorry, Dominic, you can turn on your mic by yourself, but right now I would like to give a mic to Ridevan Hatslaw, because he's attendee, so I have to help.
Right. Thank you. Can you guys hear me?
Yes. Yes.
All right, great.
Yep.
I'd first like to say thank you for the presentation. It is not what most of us expected. We expected something in the line of computing, but this is heartily welcomed. I have a strong passion for things in this line besides technology and engineering. I would like to say maybe in terms of resilience, maybe as humans just in general, if we apply more mindfulness, that could contribute to thinking more of resilience, right? Reflecting on it. But in terms of technology, I think maybe technology is leading the way in terms of resilience, like the dawn of the internet. The dawn of cloud computing is also a technology that places a huge emphasis on resilience, right? With containerization, Kubernetes, if something breaks or goes offline, something else spins up. So maybe they're doing something good in terms of efficiency and resiliency. I like your take on those 2 points. Thank you very much.
Thank you for the comment. So yes, I think that computing, there is a line of research in computing, for example, fault tolerance. And I said the internet has been, to me, an amazing success story now. Everybody's talking about what internet has done to democracy, and I mean, of course, all technology brings you them good and bad. But I would say this pandemic would have been horribly, horribly worse if not for two technologies. One is the internet that enable economies to function with so many people working from home. I've been working from home now for about a year and a half, and I'm teaching from home, and I'm meeting with my students virtually, and I'm ordering everything online, and we couldn't have done it without this technology. And the other one is mRNA technology, which is just miracle. Okay, when this started, I told from like within a month, I said the only way this will be over is by vaccination. It takes 5 years to develop a vaccine, so it's going to take 5 years. And we had the vaccine within a year. Of course, nobody could expect what will happen after that with the anti-vaxxers, but it's a whole other story. So there's a lot to learn that we have done certain things. For example, internet was designed from the get-go for resilience. This is very important. Internet did not just become resilience. On the other hand, the internet was designed for resilience, but not for security. Because the people, you know, you go and you ask the what we call the parents of the internet, and they will tell you, oh, security is such a diverse feature. There's no one definition of security. So we're going to leave security to the application layer. And to me, this was a catastrophic decision, because by the time you try to put something into that, if you don't have security built in the foundation, then people always find a way to get underneath the security layer of the application. And this has been done in networking, in hardware, in many cases. So the lesson here is the same way that we build the internet for resilience. We need to broaden definition of resilience. It's not just about connectivity. It's also about security and privacy and other features. And it means that one of the things people talk about education. So we need to start talking to our students about cybersecurity. For example, for us, I think security is a TRICE, is a senior level course. After we have taught you all the foundation, the last course you're going to take is about security. And the question is partly, how do we start training our students so they need to think about resilience? And I take it resilience in a very broad way to include security from the very beginning. If it's a senior level course, they've already got into the frame of mind how to develop system. Oh, I'll add security at the end. So the answer is we need to take something like Hippocratic Oath. First, do no harm. Start building a system. First, start thinking about resilience in the broadest possible way. Not function and features first and resilience last, because that always fails. That's the lesson we have.
Dominic, please keep your question, because and remember it, because there is a question in the chat from Ivan Lukovic: how to formulate and solve decision problems in balancing huge number of parameters that tackle resilience versus efficiency. Are there some good examples in practice?
So there is a important principle in there is a wonderful economic book by a prominent Israeli economist. It's called The Fable of Economics. And he tells you that people who argue economics tell you to do this and to do that. Economics never tell you, the theory never tells you what to do. The theory gives you trade-offs. And the decision what to do is a decision about values and politics. So in fact, he distinguished in the book, he said one economist called the law of the jungle, which is whoever has more power grabs more. And he said economics does not tell you which one is a better system. It just exposes trade-offs, and it's up to us to choose. So somehow the idea that somehow we'll have a theory that will tell us what to do, we have to make a decision in our lives, okay, which is how to balance risk and reward, okay. So I drive to work every day. It's about 5 kilometers. It's a short drive. It is safer. It would be safer for me to take the bus than to take my own car. But I still take my own car because the convenience is such that I will be from here door to door. For me, from my home to the office is about 20 minutes. If I choose to take the bus, it will be about 45 minutes each direction. And I'm an impatient person, so I take the car. but I'm willing to take a little risk, and the risk is very small. When you calculate what is the risk of serious accident when I drive essentially 10 kilometers per day, it is very, very small. So we all do this balance, and this is we'll have to make, and some of this decision will have to be made. Ultimately, that's what kind of political decision making is about looking at this trade-off. There's no right answer, okay, for this. What we should develop is better theory that will expose the trade-offs. For example, what David Ackley has done is little example of sorting. This is a great example that we can show to our students in the first year. We can teach them, look, you can choose one algorithm over the other by efficiency, but one algorithm is more resilient than is less resilient. This efficient algorithm is less resilient. Just keep that in mind and think of your application and what can go wrong. Can comparisons fail? You know, what is it about? And this way of thinking about trade-off is something that I think, again, people refer to education. I think we need to start teaching people about trade-offs early on. There's no free lunch, usually. There are few examples of a free lunch. For example, we give students free food, but in exchange, you have to come to the colloquium. So we put the food just next to the colloquium. So yes, they can get the food, but we expect them to attend the colloquium. So there is trade-off between things, and the theory will not tell us which way to go. This is where ultimately we will have to make societal decisions.
Dominic, one question, and it will be the last question because David Bader is already here and waiting for his turn. Okay, let's go, Dominic.
Dominic, your question.
Okay, thank you. That was great talk, really. And when I was listening to you, I was putting myself as a teacher, as a scientist, as a parent, even as I was wondering how to translate it to, let's say, resilient creation of a business, a company that is prepared for the market, especially in IT. But I would like to ask you another question. There is a concept of diversity in machine learning. Basically, it means that if we create AI or machine learning model, it's better to rely on very diverse data. Multiple aspects of the input information in order to create stable, resilient machine learning models. And my question to you is whether you feel some kind of analogy between this concept in machine learning and the topics that you were talking about.
So I'm not familiar with this concept in machine learning, but I'm taking a note because clearly I need to read about it and educate myself about it. But it does sound like we know that, for example, that machine learning is, you know, one of the things we discover is the principle, an old principle of garbage in, garbage out. That feature of the data will end up being in your machine learning. One of the things, the whole concept of bias in machine learning, we discover, if we, you know, there is the law of there is Vardi's law, it's been called now. So there is all principles. Those who do not learn from history are doomed to repeat it. But Vardi's law says those who learn from history, that using machine learning, are doomed to repeat it. Yes. Because they're just, you know, so for example, one of the things we discover in the United States is that there is historical bias here against essentially against Black Americans. The justice system has been biased against them all the way from the Constitution, but historically now for over 200 years. So when you learn from the data, guess what? You're going to end up with a biased machine learning. And so the issue of, I think it's interesting, I need to read more about diversity in machine learning. And I think it is essentially the same principle that I need to look whether there is a trade-off there. I'm not sure yet. Is there a trade-off there also between efficiency and resilience? So I need to educate myself a little more about it. But on the face of it, it sounds, yes, it might be an instance of the same general trade-off between resilience and efficiency. I mean, I have to say, this is, on one end, this is kind of almost, it's obvious to anyone. As soon as you tell people about this, oh, of course there is a trade-off between them. But until I read this column in the Wall Street Journal, and the light went to my head, because I've never heard these people describing it. This is the tension in our life. We all have to make decision. Should I buy insurance? You buy insurance for resilience, but it costs you money up front. Every time you buy insurance, you have to decide how much insurance should you buy. What, you know, we all make this decision intuitive all the time, but we have not thought carefully that there is a general trade-off here in life. It's not just about computing and economics. There is a general trade-off between efficiency and economics. And we can start teaching our kids, you know, I give you an allowance. Do you save or not? Because are you sure that I will always be able to give an allowance? Maybe I'll lose my job and you want to have some of your own saving. We can start teaching our children about efficiency versus resilience. In fact, there is a famous, the so-called the marshmallow experiment. So there is a famous experiment where they give children, they put like 5 marshmallows in a plate. And it says, you can eat the marshmallows, but if you can avoid eating them for an hour, you'll have 5 more marshmallows. And can the kids control themselves and not eat the marshmallows? And it turned out that they've done this, and they've looked years later, and the kids that could control and not eat the marshmallows generally did better in life. This ability of impulse control, the whole concept of impulse control, is in some sense also about efficiency versus resilience.
Thank you very much.
Thank you very much. It's your talk was really, as has been talked, that it's really unexpected. I didn't expect such kind of talk, but it is really inspiring talk. And definitely all who were presented here, who can hear you, will be thinking the rest of the days, or maybe the rest of long time. I think that thank you very much. It's really pity that our conference is virtual and we cannot ability to discuss, to continue this discussion with you, because I have a also, like probably all of listener, a huge amount of comments. Thank you very much, and let's hope that we can meet in reality, and we will have a chance to discuss in real life. And thank you very much. And
My pleasure.
all of listener, I would like to invite you to the next talk. So thank you, Moshe, and have a good day.
Bye-bye. Dziękuję.
Thank you.